Four adventurers were on their way back from their long adventure, returning back to the royal capital after finally defeating the Demon King. The world may be saved, but life wasn't at their end, and it would still stretch beyond their triumph, especially for an elf like Fren. They walked through the city as citizens cheered for their achievements and made their way to the capital to be praised by the king. The hero Himmel, the warrior Sen, the priest Heiter, and the mage Fren. Statues of them were going to get erected in the plaza, while they would also be able to drink alcohol for free, to which Heiter seemed to be excited for. But Fren called him corrupt for such an unconventional behavior for a priest. Sen hummed and thought about how their adventure was finally over, and everyone was still in shock about how they spent the last 10 years with each other, reminiscing the memories of their past. There were times when Himmel and Sen were almost executed for being rude to the king, or times when Heiter was useless whenever he would get a hangover, or when Fren almost got eaten by a mimic. They all chatted for a while about the ridiculous things that had happened, before the elf girl had said that their adventure was short, confusing the others for a moment, until they were distracted by the Era meteors. This meteor shower was one that happened once every 50 years, and brought a perfect beginning to a peaceful era. However, it seemed quite hard to see in town, according to Fren. She said that she would try to take everyone to a better place 50 years from now to witness the meteors more beautifully, causing Himmel to chuckle. The next day, it was time for Fren to make her leave, and Himmel asked the girl what she was going to do next after all their adventuring. And her choice was that she was going to continue acquiring magic and explore the central provinces for a century, while occasionally showing her face around the capital in order to see her comrades every once in a while to check in on them. Heiter chuckled at the fact that they couldn't seem to perceive an elf's feelings, while Himmel wondered how long the girl had been alive. Even if 50 or 100 years passed, it would probably be just another day to Fren. She walked away, and that was the start of her long journey, or short one in her eyes. Through forests, snow, the hot sun, caves, getting eaten by a mimic again, all that she could possibly do just because she wants to acquire more magic. Fren eventually stumbled upon a man who said that he didn't own a certain monster material that she was looking for. However, she had remembered that there should be one left in Himmel's possession, which would give an excuse for her to drop by, as it was also almost time for the Era meteors again. The elf girl had arrived at the capital city once again, and it had changed considerably since the last time she visited. But the most change was found in the comrades she once adventured with, as they had aged much in the last 50 years, while Fren didn't look a day older. She was there both for the meteor shower and the Darkness Dragon's horn, which Himmel did not forget about, since it had an ominous aura seeping out of the drawer it was in for the last 50 years. He had given it to her, saying that he didn't mind such a thing, since it was a treasure from a beloved comrade. She left the building with the horn, not understanding the strong feelings that Himmel had as her comrade, but she soon stumbled upon a statue that showed all four of them in their prime. After she had stashed away the horn in a safe place, Fren had went back to ask if Himmel was ready to leave with the others. Heiter had become a bishop at the Holy City, while Sen did not seem to have changed much. The destination that Fren wanted to show them was a week's walk from where they were, and the three men gave exasperated looks due to such a tread in their old age. But they still went off, feeling the nostalgia for their old days of adventuring. Himmel thought back to all the memories he had made with his comrades and thanked Fren for finally coming back and bringing a time where they would all reconnect again. And unfortunately enough, Himmel met his end, and was put in a coffin where Heiter had to give the prayer for his own friend. Everyone in the building was crying for Himmel's death, while Fren did not seem to shed any tears, causing people to start gossiping and complaining about how heartless she was, despite not knowing anything about her. Heiter tried to defend her until Fren started to speak and finally started to cry, regretting not getting to know him more than she did during the 10 years they spent adventuring. After the ceremony, Heiter finally took his leave back to the Holy City, but just before he left, the elf girl asked him if he wasn't afraid of death. He didn't answer yes, but all that the priest man said was that they were the hero party who saved the world, and it was for the sake that they would definitely live luxuriously up in heaven during their afterlife that he chose to fight alongside the other three. Fren called him corrupt one more time, and the carriage rode him away, leaving Fren and Sen left. She told the short dwarf that she wanted a powerful vanguard like him to come along with her, as she was just a mage. However, he told the girl that he was no longer at an age capable of wielding an axe, which surprised Fren. He told the girl that the days passed by slower once one would grow old, causing her to hum in thought, before it was time for the two to bid farewell, and she walked off as Sen watched. 20 years had passed ever since Himmel's passing, and Fry-Ren found herself walking through a forest while trying to make her way to Heiter. However, she stumbled upon a child with purple hair. The elf girl was confused, until this very girl would lead Fry-Ren to the house where the priest man was even older, making a joke about how difficult it was to die handsomely. Fry-Ren said that she even had brought alcohol to offer to his grave, but since he wasn't dead, she asked if he wanted it now. Heiter told her that he had unfortunately stopped drinking already, to which she would seemingly make a joke that the goddesses wouldn't forgive him, even if he were to act good now. Fry-Ren asked who the little girl was, and he said that her name was Fern, and was a war orphan from the southern provinces. He asked why Fry-Ren was there, and the elf girl was honest by saying that she wanted to pay a visit while she was shopping at the holy city. Heiter decided that this would be a good idea to try and give one request to Fry-Ren, asking if she could adopt his disciple, as Fern had the qualities of a mage. Fry-Ren was not too content with that idea and apologized, as the girl would only be a burden, since the death rate of mage apprentices on the battlefield was quite high, and Fry-Ren had no intention of sending a child a friend left in her care into a death trap. After hearing that, Heiter had another request for her, and brought her down to a small library that held a black grimoire, that held records of now-lost resurrection and immortality spells. The elf girl was in disbelief about such magic existing, but he wanted her to decipher the book to truly know if that were the case. She said that it would likely take 5 or 6 years, and she also wanted to know why he wanted her to do this, when he seemed to embrace the idea of death. However, his reasons were because he was simply showing off, and that now he was more afraid of dying than he ever was before. He wasn't asking for immortality, just a little more time. Fry-Ren called him corrupt once more, but he still asked her to decipher the book, while also teaching Fern magic in the free time that she had from deciphering. Fry-Ren would find the little girl at the edge of a cliff, trying to train her magic. The elf girl was impressed by the nearly undetectable presence to mana sensory that Fern seemed to have, and how the little girl could already handle the basics of being a mage. Fern had explained that Heiter had told her that she would be able to handle herself when she could knock down the rock on top of the other cliff. But unfortunately, the little girl was only able to reach so far with the magic aimed with her staff. She asked Fry-Ren how she would be able to train to reach the rock, but the elf girl wanted to ask if Fern liked magic. The only answer was somewhat, to which Fry-Ren agreed, and started to explain the process of what it would take to succeed in a long-range magical attack. And after many upon many days and years and memories being made, Fry-Ren noticed how the point that Fern had reached was something that the average person would need 10 years to reach. Heiter was impressed by how far the child had come, but Fry-Ren knew that there was still a long way to go, and said that she would finish deciphering the grimoire earlier than that. She was about to say one more thing about the grimoire before Fry-Ren would turn around and realize that Heiter had collapsed, due to how much his age had finally come upon him. Fry-Ren was not happy with the situation, but Heiter tried to reassure her that it was a miracle that he could live as long as he could, and the girl would try to put her focus on something else, and said that she would hurry up with deciphering the grimoire. That same day, Fry-Ren would find Fern at the same cliff, still trying to knock down the rock, as it was something that she needed to do before Heiter would pass away. She was set on this goal, as she was saved by the man when she was only a child. After having lost her parents and at the edge of a cliff, she felt as though she had no purpose in life anymore since her parents were dead. Right as she was about to jump, Heiter sat on a nearby rock and was having a drink, while telling the girl that it would be a waste for her to die at such a young age. He explained that he had lost an old friend a while back, and this friend was the kind of person who would never leave behind someone in trouble. And unlike Himmel, Heiter considered living the rest of his life quietly. But a thought had suddenly dawned on Heiter. If he were to die like this, everything regarding courage, determination, and friendship would disappear from the world as well. Because of this memory, Heiter told the girl that if she had beloved memories inside of her, then it would be a waste to die with them. Fern knew that Heiter had always feared dying and leaving her alone, but Fern herself didn't want the man to regret saving her. Whether she was a mage or not, she wanted to learn how to survive on her own and repay her gratitude to him, and make Heiter think that he was glad to have saved her, and that everything would be alright. Fry-Ren decided to leave the girl to do as she wished, and Fry-Ren went back to the house to continue deciphering the grimoire, while Fern would continue practicing her magic to hit the rock. After all her research, Fry-Ren had concluded that resurrection and immortality were both not recorded in the book, but Heiter had known that such magic didn't really exist. Since that was the case, she asked him why he had made her do such a task, but Heiter was more focused on how Fern was turning out. The girl was still rough around the edges, but it was not something to worry about anymore regarding her ability to protect herself. Heiter asked for Fry-Ren to leave with Fern by tonight, as all the training had meant that Fern was likely not a burden anymore. He didn't want Fern to experience losing anyone else, and wanted to leave the girl in Fry-Ren's care. However, the elf girl told him that he should be giving a proper farewell to the girl, and trying to make as many memories as possible with her. Not only were these words true in the situation, but the elf girl started to cry, as she remembered her regrets of not doing the same with Himmel. As Fry-Ren walked back to where Fern would likely be, she would think back to her last question to the old man just before she left. She asked him why Heiter had saved Fern, and his only answer was because Himmel would have done the same. Fry-Ren brought Fern back in order to give a final goodbye to Heiter, while Fry-Ren would go into the forest to check on the girl's progress and see that Fern had finally reached the rock, giving the elf girl thoughts about how she was going to do the same thing that Himmel would have done with Fern. They finally buried Heiter in the next few days, and Fry-Ren had dumped alcohol onto his grave as Fern thanked the elf girl for her actions. Fry-Ren gave a soft smile and said that she felt truly outsmarted by such a corrupt priest that she called a comrade, and promptly told Fern that it was time for them to set off on their next task. 26 years had passed since Himmel's passing, and Fry-Ren along with Fern were now in the Turk region. They were doing many small tasks, with the rewards only being small magic spells that only commoners would learn. Some such spells that they had gathered were ones that derusted bronze statues, turned sweet grapes into sour ones, and now it was magic that produced warm tea. Fern was confused as to why they'd been acquiring such magic, but the elf girl would not give a proper answer, and just said that her reasons of acquiring magic were somewhat similar to Fern's reasons. Another task that they were given from an old lady was one where they would derust a statue, except that statue was one of Himmel. The old lady was disappointed that she was not able to care for it anymore at her age, and how the other villagers were not concerned with its shape either. But the lady wanted something to be done about it since Himmel had fought for her village when a monster attacked it. Fry-Ren was silent for a moment, before saying that the state of the statue was karma for being a show-off and frustrating the artisan who made the statue by posing over 18 hours before settling with a foolproof pose. The old lady chuckled at the story and was reminded about an elven mage who was in the hero's party, but dismissed the thought as Fry-Ren proceeded to clean up the statue. Fry-Ren and Fern started to walk away, until the lady said that she was going to plant flowers after that, causing Fern to ask the elf girl if she could use magic that produced flower beds. It was true that she had that power. However, Fry-Ren wanted to use a suitable flower for the statue, that flower being a blue moonweed, as it was the flower of Himmel's hometown. The old woman taught Fry-Ren about the flower and its appearance, in order to help her search for such a flower, since none existed anymore for several decades near the forest after having been destroyed. The elf girl told Fern to stop playing with the seed rats and to venture off, as they were going to find the blue moonweed. Fry-Ren was set on this task, despite how impossible it may seem, making Fern ask if she was doing it for Himmel, but Fry-Ren claimed that it was definitely just for herself. Time had passed and there was still no luck in finding the blue moonweed, making Fern wonder if they were ever going to find this flower, as it had already been half a year since they first started looking. Fern decided to go back to the old woman's house alone and ask her if she thought they would ever find the blue moonweed, as Fern believed that Fry-Ren's attachment to magic was abnormal, to which the old lady hummed and thawed at the thought process of the youth. Fern wondered if she was wrong, and the old lady said that she wasn't. However, Fry-Ren likely had a different perspective on the situation, and all Fern needed was to make Fry-Ren understand. Fern sat next to the elf girl and tried to explain that the seeds in the small bag she had was a related species to the blue moonweed, and could be used to be planted around the statue. But Fry-Ren already understood the reason why Fern was saying what she was. Fry-Ren tried to reassure the girl that they would stop after a little more searching, confusing the little girl until Fry-Ren had told her to be quiet, as the seed rat had stolen the bag of flower seeds and ran off with it. As they went to search for the small creature, Fern asked the elf girl once again why she was acquiring magic, and she insisted that it really was just a hobby of hers, but admitted that she had lived more lazily before a person in her past praised her for the magic she acquired. It seemed silly in Fern's eyes, but Fry-Ren agreed. The two finally arrived at a run-down stone structure, where the seed rats seemed to be storing their feed safe away from enemies. But Fry-Ren noticed the flower petals that fell from the top of the structure. She thought back on a memory where the party was having fun while in a bed of flowers, and Himmel was explaining to the elf girl that the flower from his hometown was beautiful and he wanted to show it to her one day when he had the chance. That chance never came in his life, but at least the girl was able to finally see it despite how late it was. Fern asked why Fry-Ren dedicated her heart and soul to magic, but Fry-Ren knew that Fern could understand, since she became a mage because of Hyter. They finally came back to the old lady and planted the flowers near the statue, meaning that their job was done. However, Fry-Ren would give one last touch-up to the statue, and give it a flower crown, before she and Fern would finally carry on with their journey. 27 years had passed since Hero Himmel's passing, and Fry-Ren and Fern were finally in a trading town called Warm. Since they were there, Fry-Ren told the little girl that they should split up to replenish supplies for their journey. But it seemed that most of the necessities were Fern's responsibility, while Fry-Ren claimed that she would just be buying herbs and the like. However, the elf girl would give a face that, after a while of knowing Fry-Ren, meant that she was hiding something. In previous towns and cities, that face had led to Fry-Ren buying unnecessary things such as bones and weird drugs, which Fern never understood the actions that Fry-Ren would make. The elf girl would walk off and say that they would both meet up at the inn later, but Fern did not trust that something wouldn't go wrong, and decided to keep a close watch on her just in case. Fry-Ren ended up going to an accessory shop which reminded Fern about how the elf girl had an interest in fashion. Fry-Ren stared very intensely at the jewelry before she would give an expression that Fern would have never seen the girl ever make before, making Fern worried until Fry-Ren would finally make a decision after a lot of time and box said item before leaving. Fern decided that such a purchase was better than bones or drugs, but before the girl would head back to the shops, Fry-Ren would ask a random man if there was a candy shop around, which only made Fern worry even more, and feel the need to follow Fry-Ren just a bit longer. Fry-Ren soon walked into what seemed to be a tavern with a bunch of scary-looking men, who were asked by the elf girl about where a candy shop would be, and Fern believed that this was not the place to be asking about candy. Surprisingly enough, the men had truthfully answered that there were many store owners who would tell Fry-Ren about the tasty candy that she could find in town, shocking Fern by how these people were actually not as bad as she expected. These men were found out to be adventurers who admitted that candy was the lifeblood of theirs, despite their wild appearance. And Fry-Ren soon left the tavern to find the candy shop, or at least that's what Fern thought, until Fry-Ren would soon head back to the inn, which reminded Fern about her responsibilities of shopping. But because she was watching Fry-Ren the entire day, it had made the girl late. Fern apologized for her delay, but Fry-Ren was not too angry about it, and took the girl out for a meal at one of the restaurants that she had heard about from the other citizens of the town. Fern decided to apologize once more, this time for the fact that she had followed Fry-Ren throughout the day. But Fern did not comment any more on her apology, and decided to just look at the menu that the elf girl gave her. Fry-Ren wanted Fern to choose whatever she liked, to which she did, and asked what Fry-Ren wanted. However, it seemed as though Fern already knew the answer, and asked if Fry-Ren wanted the Merkur pudding. This action had caused a memory in Fry-Ren to appear, about how Himmel knew the same about such things after traveling together with the girl for several years now. Fry-Ren realized that while everyone learned things about her, she did not know a single thing about any of her comrades, which caused the three men to start listing things off about themselves in order for the girl to learn any facts about them. It was Fry-Ren's turn to apologize, as she admitted that she didn't know a thing about Fern, and gave the girl the gift box from earlier. And the likely reason she was freaking out earlier was because she didn't know which accessory Fern would enjoy. Fern was appreciative of the gift, as it was ironically her birthday that day, and she opened it to see that it was a beautiful hair ornament. The girl had thanked Fry-Ren not only for the gift, but also the attempts that Fry-Ren seemed to take to get to know Fern more. But the elf girl still did not seem to understand the feelings that a human feels for things. The next day they set off for their next destination, and Fern adorned the hair ornament that Fry-Ren had gotten her, the girl asking Fry-Ren what was the goal of their journey. Fry-Ren just said that the journey was one out of interest to gather magic. However, a new goal of hers had formed when she wanted to retrace the steps that she took with Himmel and the others as much as possible before they faded away. She wasn't sure if it was something important to her, but she said that she would find out as time went. They walked off, and Fry-Ren realized that Fern had surpassed the elf girl in height, and learned that it was because Fern had just turned 16 and had become a lady. The two were in the central provinces and walked through the Gross Forest, practicing magic whenever they could. Fry-Ren had figured as though Fern had more or less gotten acquainted with the defense magic and wanted to test it out. Fern thought that she would be just fine with the wall in front of her. However, the elf girl used her magic to curve around the shield and hit Fern from behind her. Fry-Ren told the girl that she would be dead if this wasn't training, and sent more attacks towards the girl, to which Fern would respond by creating a shield in the shape of an orb around her body. Fry-Ren saw this as the correct choice before sending more attacks towards the young woman. After a while, Fern was exhausted, and Fry-Ren knew that it was time for them to stop for the day and continue their trek through the forest, while explaining more magic to the girl. Her defense magic was powerful but burned a lot of mana, meaning that it would exhaust her mana in a couple of minutes if she were to continue expanding its size. Fern thought about the information for a moment and figured that the correct decision would be to expand specific areas the moment she would be hit, and Fry-Ren confirmed. She wondered why they had only been training defensive magic, but Fry-Ren explained that it was linked directly to the survival of mages. Fern agreed but was still confused as to how powerful a defense truly was. However, Fry-Ren insisted that magic wasn't only just about combat. They arrived at the village for a reason that was different to their normal task of acquiring peculiar magic. The elf girl tried to ask the villagers a question, but it seemed as though they already recognized her due to her well-known appearance. And one of the men was already willing to show her the way to where something called Qual was sealed. Fern asked what Qual was, and the man explained that it was a person who was sealed, the Elder Sage of Corruption, Qual. He was a demon that had committed many atrocities 80 years ago, but was sealed away by hero Himmel's party. Fry-Ren had come to eliminate the man as the seal was going to be undone soon, but she was confused as to how the old man had known about her intentions. That was until she would learn that until almost 30 years ago, Himmel would visit the village once a year to check on the condition of the seal, while occasionally speaking about Fry-Ren. Himmel had told the villagers that she was heartless in never coming to check, but assured that she was not as heartless to where she would leave the village to die and likely show up when the seal was about to be broken. There he stood, Qual, in chains and frozen in place as the seal continued to hold him down. Fry-Ren planned to fully remove the seal tomorrow and dispose of Qual, and went to sleep at the inn of the town. Fern asked why Fry-Ren had sealed the beast instead of defeating it, to which Fry-Ren explained that it was because Qual was too powerful due to his killing magic Soul Track, the first piercing magic in history that could pierce all of mankind's defense magics while directly eradicating a person's body. 40% of adventurers and 70% of sorcerers just in that very region were said to be killed by Soul Track. Fern wondered if Fry-Ren was going to have any trouble while fighting against such a powerful man. But while Fry-Ren agreed, she was going to show Fern why such a large amount of power would backfire the day that she would fight Qual. The next day, Fry-Ren told the girl to be on her guard as she was going to undo the seal and allow the large man to stand up and stretch, asking how much time had passed since he was sealed. She answered truthfully and told the beast that the Demon King had already been killed, making the creature laugh and try to avenge the Demon King by attacking the two girls. Fern had protected them using the same defensive magic that she had used earlier, impressing Qual, as he believed that the defense technique was one of advanced quality. However, what he didn't know, and what Fern was confused about, was the fact that Qual had only used ordinary offense magic. Fry-Ren started to explain to Qual that his magic used to be powerful, until sorcerers across the continent studied and analyzed his soul track until magic systems had created magic resistance to prove killing magic useless of its own proper use. Qual listened closely to the words that Fry-Ren said, and was told that the elf girl would grant the monster a peaceful death if he were to cooperate. However, Qual still wanted to not back down or give up. He realized that Fern's defenses were taxing on her mana, and proceeded to send more attacks in a similar fashion just like her training, meaning that she would easily block them, as Fry-Ren would use offensive magic in the meantime, before sending Qual's own magic against him and killing him within seconds. The large beast had turned to dust, and the village could now live in peace, and the two were thanked for their actions. Fry-Ren saw the hat that the man from before wore and realized that this was the same boy that flipped up her skirt 80 years ago, and who Himmel almost beat up out of both anger and seemingly jealousy for being able to see what was under there. The two promptly left after thanking them, and Fern asked if the man was showing her gratitude. But Fry-Ren knew it wasn't direct gratitude since the villagers believed in Himmel the most out of all of the party members. Despite this, Fern tried to reassure the elf girl that if anyone believed in her, it was Himmel himself. They arrived in the Glands Channel, a place where cruise ships would meet a terrible fate. In the past, all of the villages around would maintain the coast, but it was given up eventually due to the lack of manpower. It used to be a crystal clear sea in the past, as told from the old man, who asked if a book by the great mage Flamme would be enough as a reward. Fry-Ren understood the circumstances of the village, and accepted the request and reward, but both of them knew that the grimoire was a counterfeit. Fry-Ren knew that no such flame books existed out in the world. However, Fry-Ren still accepted the request just out of her own greed. 3 months had passed and winter had arrived, but they were still not done with cleaning up the coast. The villagers had gotten used to the two girls and their presence, but it wouldn't be too long until they would be done with their tasks. As Fern woke the elf girl up to continue the job, Fern felt as though she was almost a mother to Fry-Ren due to having to wake up, feed, and put clothes on Fry-Ren every morning. Fry-Ren claimed that she could do it all herself if it wasn't for her sleeping problems, and Fern wondered if the hero party was ever angry with her oversleeping, to which the elf girl admitted that there was a time. However, it was only once, as the other three were quite tolerant of her behavior. More and more days passed of them cleaning up the coast, and the winter had gotten colder. The old man from before asked if they believed they would be done in time for New Year, and Fry-Ren said yes in a very vague way. The two continued cleaning up the last third of the coast, and Fern asked the elf girl how the cleaning was related to the New Year anniversary, to which Fry-Ren would explain that it was due to the village having a custom of watching the sunrise on New Year, and watch the sunlight reflect off the untainted sea. There wasn't much time left, but through much effort from both of the girls, they had finally gotten the cleaning done just in time for the celebration. The old man thanked the two for their help and asked if they were going to participate, and Fry-Ren affirmed that they would, making Fern wonder if that was going to be true. Fry-Ren explained that she would pull an all-nighter and go to such a length in order to truly see the sight that the village saw was one to value. Not only was that the reason, but she had remembered how Himmel was disappointed in the girl for not coming to see the event, as he believed that she would have had fun because that was who she supposedly was. When Fern woke up, she realized Fry-Ren was asleep and desperately woke her up to pull her out of bed and bring her to the coast, where the sun rose from the horizon. It was beautiful, and Fry-Ren wondered what Himmel was talking about. But Fern knew that this sight invoked some joy in the girl, as she was caught smiling while watching it. Fry-Ren was surprised by this fact, before smiling once again, and happy that she was able to see the sunrise with another, even if it was only because that person had to make sure she was awake in the first place. Fry-Ren remembered another memory, about how the party had visited the place where Aisen's family was buried after his village was attacked by demons. Heiter kneeled down and started to pray, but the dwarf was confused as religion was not something he believed in. However, Heiter still believed in it, despite dwarven traditions. Fry-Ren was also skeptical about it, and Himmel did not care too much about it, to which Heiter agreed about not minding and explained that religion should exist, as it would be a better thought that there would be something after death, instead of people's lives just ending up as nothing. As everyone heard this, they decided to join the prayer, and Aisen was seen there praying for his family even after all those 80 years after their adventure together. Fry-Ren and Fern had arrived to the Brett region, and the elf girl had told the dwarf that she had come to hang out 30 years after Himmel's passing. She learned that Heiter had also asked for a request from the dwarf, similar to what he had asked of Fry-Ren, and the elf girl wondered what was something that Aisen wanted help with from the two of them. He told them that he wanted to go to the Vol Basin to search for any of the Great Mage Flame's notes, since they were likely in that area, since it was a place that Heiter discovered by compiling all of the records Flame left in the Holy City. Fry-Ren would normally not care for the time spent in searching for something, but she knew that Fern hated wasting time and decided to search with efficiency, surprising Aisen by Fry-Ren's change in behavior and respecting another's time. It took the three a few days, but they had finally found a large tree to start their task in finding where the Vol Basin would be. Fry-Ren asked the dwarf why he was beginning this search now, and he admitted that he wanted the girl to convey her regrets to the man himself by using Flame's notes to converse with the dead. While that was true, Aisen also wanted to know about Himmel, and wanted to help Fry-Ren through her repent over the man. The tree they found and the ruins under it were protected by a barrier, reminding Fry-Ren about her master in her past from 1,000 years ago. Her master had planted a small tree sprout in the ground, and said that it would protect the place even after many, many years after the woman was dead. But Fry-Ren's master knew that Fry-Ren would still be alive, and make a mistake that would cause the elf girl to want to get to know people more. The woman wanted Fry-Ren to come back to that place when the day would arrive to be able to guide the elf girl. Now, this was that day. The Great Mage Flame, her long-lost master, and the last book of the true writings from her. In the book, Flame spoke about heaven, and Fern wondered if it was real, but Aisen insisted and repeated Heiter's words, saying that it was better that way to believe such a place existed, to which Fry-Ren agreed. The book said that this heaven was located near the continent of End, the same place where the Demon King's castle stood. Aisen told Fry-Ren to find a role and talk to Himmel, since he would be of assistance to the dwarf, but Fry-Ren accepted without hesitation and with a smile. After this interaction, they made their way on carriage, and Fry-Ren soon fell asleep. Fern wondered how cold it truly would be around the Demon King's castle, But Aysen explained that End was located at the northernmost part of the continent, and much had happened there. They continued their trek toward the castle, and Fryren continued to stay asleep like a rock, and Fern would consider it futile to wake the elf girl up. But Aysen decided to break the silence and ask if Fryren was a good teacher. Fern was not entirely sure, due to sometimes being taken advantage of, Fryren showing interest in Himmel and the others, and the fact that Fryren took her in because of Heiter. But she did think of Fryren as a curious person. Even if Fryren never showed interest in Fern, the elf girl would still bestow a present every time it was Fern's birthday, making the girl wonder what was going through Fryren's mind. Aysen was reminded of the time that the four in the party watched the meteor shower together. They asked the girl what she was going to do after their adventure, to which she responded that she would continue traveling, and Aysen suggested that she should get an apprentice to have someone to talk to while traveling. But Fryren believed that would be a waste of time, especially since they died off quickly. The dwarf said that was not what it meant to have relationships with people, but Fryren insisted that it was, and thought that Aysen would understand since he is also a non-human being. Heiter decided to interrupt the gloomy topic and say that it was time to drink on their supposedly joyous day. But they all knew that it was just an excuse for the priest man to drink. Aysen was brought back to reality, and reassured Fern that Fryren was indeed a good teacher, at least in the dwarf's eyes. They arrived back at the place where Aysen's family was buried, since he was not going to come along in their adventure due to his age making him a burden. He apologized for the long journey it was going to take the two, since it took their hero party 10 years to get to the castle. But Fryren did not seem alarmed by the amount, due to her perspective on the world. Aysen repeated the words that she had told him long ago, and Fryren did recall saying such words, causing Aysen to be fascinated by the fact that little time seemed to have changed the elf girl so much. They bade their goodbyes, and the two girls walked off and continued their trek to the castle, even if it would take quite a long time. Fern knew that those 10 years would add together and make one half of her life that she would have spent with Fryren. But the elf girl smiled and said that Fern was going to spend a lot more time with her from here on. Back when Fern was still at Heiter's home and was hanging out with him right before he died, Heiter would tell the girl to be good and abide by everything that Fryren would tell her, or else. The purple-haired girl wondered why he said "or else," until Heiter explained that he would materialize after he died, seemingly joking. Fern chuckled at the words, but Heiter decided to take back his words and still seemingly materialize, just to see her for a bit, even if she stayed good. She woke up from her dream and was told by Fryren that they were soon about to arrive at the village of the Qual region. As they walked through the area, a woman had noticed them, and saw that it looked like they were planning to attempt the path of the mountain pass, causing her to warn them that they shouldn't, as many had gone missing already. There were stories that these people were taken by ghosts, and people around the village gave reports that the ghosts seen were of their deceased relatives or people they once knew. Fryren knew this wasn't the doing of the undead, and rather was the doing of a being they shouldn't encounter. They were to leave first thing in the morning, but Fern was too worried for the villagers, and wanted to do something about it since she was good, unlike Fryren. The elf girl smiled and decided to follow what Fern wanted, and the next day they went off to the forest for their next destination. The two arrived to the location where the villagers were said to have been disappearing lately, and Fryren said that there were clues scattered all over. There were traces of magic being used, and Fryren wanted to slightly test the girl by asking what kind of magic she thought it was, to which the purple-haired girl said that it was phantom magic. In a book about magical ecology that Fern had read, there were monsters that would lure prey through the use of phantoms. They continued walking, and Fryren would explain that this was likely the work of Einsam, the phantom demon, who is sly and greedy even among monsters of its species, and he only preyed on people. This monster would lure people in using phantom corpses of the people who were beloved to the targets. However, Fryren said that the phantoms controlled by Einsam were no threats to mages. This was because mages had the ability to hit these phantoms with a high concentration of mana, to readily disperse them. Fern believed that it would be an easy task, since she would know that the phantoms were imposters. But Fryren was a little hesitant to believe the girl, since Fryren would explain that she had to fire upon a phantom of her own master who was begging for her life. The elf girl had already gotten used to her master's begging, which made her not feel guilty of dispersing the imposter. They started to get deeper into the forest and realized that the fog started to appear around them and obscure their vision, which meant that they were close to the demon. Fern heard a voice and turned around to see Heiter, except she was ready and calm enough to prepare an attack. At least, that was what she thought, before Heiter had started to praise the girl and use words that she had once heard in her memories. This caused her to freeze in place with her conflicted feelings, as Fryren realized the situation and was about to help. until Himmel's form had appeared as well, making the elf girl chuckle at how it seemed she had changed enough for the phantom to be different than last time. Surprisingly and luckily, Himmel did not try to stall for any time and just told Fren to shoot him, which she was already in the process of, and shot without hesitation. Fern broke out of her trance and saw the demon curling behind Heiter's ghostly form, which gave her enough confidence to shoot and kill the phantom as well. Fern felt almost disappointed and sad after doing such an act, asking Fren if that really was a phantom of Heiter. Fren affirmed that it was, and they walked off as the elf girl reassured Fern, and said that they would go see him for real next time since they were heading for Oriole, the land where souls rested. A while later, the two had ended up in the Regal Canyons, and they were currently hiding behind some bushes as they stumbled upon a dragon that was guarding its nest. It was Fern's first time seeing a dragon, but Fren was more focused on the fact that there was a grimoire inside of the dragon's nest. That seemed to be a book that the elf girl was looking for. Fern was almost disappointed by hearing Fren say this, as it seemed as though Fren's passion never ended. However, she asked as to why a grimoire of all things was in the nest. Fren explained that dragons would use magically imbued items as materials for their nest, and this dragon in particular was a solar dragon, which would devour any and every adventurer it found. She told Fern to try and eliminate it without hitting the nest, but unfortunately Fern did not have a strong enough blast to even scratch the dragon. Fren almost expected this and immediately started to run before Fern could even react, as the dragon soon appeared in the air behind the girl, making her wonder what was going on before it processed in her mind. After a while of running, the two of them had finally ended up in a place where they were safe, away from the large creature, as Fern tried to catch her breath after the near-death situation. Fren decided that it was time to head back, and saw the village in the distance, saying that it was probably time for them to give in and just get themselves a comrade for their journey. Fren remembered the time just before they left Isen when the dwarf would explain that he knew a vanguard that was likely to join their group, since he knew that Fren was looking for one. He was a warrior by the name of Stark, who was in a village along the Regal Canyons and was Isen's disciple. The elf girl asked if this man was a good warrior, but Isen stayed silent for a moment as the memory ended. The two had entered the town, and Fern was impressed by how peaceful the town seemed when there was a dragon nearby, changing the topic as Fern asked what kind of magic was in the grimoire. It was magic that would make clothes transparent, which made Fern sigh, since Fren seemed to only ever gather strange kinds of magic. Fren tried to explain how it would prove to be useful until an old woman had walked up to the two, and said that Stark would like to speak with them, surprising the elf girl by how easy it was to be led to the man in question. They walked through a forest while being guided by the old lady as she started to tell a story about how the dragon from nearby had attacked their village, until Stark had walked out in front of the dragon and did not take a single step away, only staring it down until the dragon receded. Ever since then, because Stark had chosen to stay in the village, the area has never once been attacked, and everyone had the chance to be able to live on peacefully. Fern asked Fren if this meant they would be able to defeat the dragon with the help of Stark, to which Fren said that was ideally the thought. They found the man sitting near a mountain that had a large dent in it, as the children were being given confidence from Stark that they would grow to become strong warriors like him. However, he would also try to tell them that warriors weren't all that great. The children soon ran to the old woman as Fren and Fern walked up to Stark, and the red-haired boy tried to warn them that they should not agitate the dragon too much, or else it would bring danger on the village, bringing up a scar that he had supposedly gotten from a darkness dragon in the past. Suddenly, the boy was interrupted by Fren, who knew that he was lying about the significance of his scar. He didn't give the truth and instead just asked who they were, to which Fren truthfully introduced herself, and Stark recognized the name from his master and told the old woman and children to leave. Fren told the boy that they wanted him to join their vanguard and help them suppress the solar dragon, as there was a grimoire she was interested in, along with the fact that her comrades in the past had praised her magic. Stark tried to explain that the dragon was supposedly too intense for him to handle alone, not even seeming to want to keep it still for 30 seconds, which caused Fren to ask how much experience the boy had with fighting monsters. He suddenly broke out into tears and said that it was 0, believing that the dragon only spared him on a whim and stopped attacking the village for an unknown reason. Fern felt disappointed by this scene, and wanted to go look elsewhere for a vanguard, but Fren had faith in him. She told him to give it one night to think it over while they would go back to the village and see how idolized the boy was, despite how cowardly he seemed in front of them. Fren was not denying he was a coward, but she could see something in him. The two were about to walk back to the inn until a sound could be heard in the distance, which Fren told Fern to check out while she would go to bed. The elf girl thought back on her memory and knew Isen saw himself in Stark, someone who ran away from the demons like a coward. So the dwarf drilled everything he knew into the boy and knew that he would be able to fight for someone else's sake. Fern walked back to the same spot the two had met Stark at earlier that day, and she saw him in the middle of his training using his axe to break through the mountain. She asked him why he continued to train even if he didn't want to fight the dragon, and Stark said that he wanted to continue being a hero and making sure everyone in the village was safe. He still believed that he didn't do a single thing to save said village, and it was only a whim and pure luck that the dragon hadn't attacked. Yet he still felt a need to protect the village, even if he knew that he would likely still end up running away. Stark admitted that his scar was something he had gotten from his master, over his aversion to fighting monsters, and was the first time Aisen had ever hit him, and it seemed as though the dwarf had never once praised him. Fern grabbed Stark's hand and stared at it, before saying that she didn't believe he would run away, as she felt that they had something in common. The girl's experience when fighting her first monster was not a calm one, as she was seized by fear and ran. But Fryren refused to help, which made Fern finally gain resolve to turn towards the monster and take it down. She knew Stark may be a coward, but all he needed was resolve. The next day, the two walked to find that Stark had seemingly fled. But he finally appeared when Fern stalled for time out of fear of the dragon. He asked Fryren to promise that they would kill the dragon even if he were to die, and she did. The elf girl asked why he was going to such lengths for the villagers, but Stark thought that was obvious, since he had lived in the village for 3 years. Fryren couldn't see the value since her perception of time was different, but the conversation was dismissed and they walked off toward the dragon. His hands were shaking in fear, and Fryren chuckled at the sight, as it reminded her of Aisen. They were up against a large monster, and the dwarf's hands were shaking just like Stark's. But Aisen said that it was fear that carried them all the way there. They finally reached the dragon, and Stark would stand right in front of it, trying to find the resolve as the dragon stared him down while being vigilant. Fryren knew that it was no whim that the dragon didn't attack the village, as dragons were intelligent. They were not foolish enough to antagonize powerful enemies. When Aisen hit Stark, it was out of fear of the power of his own disciple. Stark would become an incredible warrior. In one swift move, Stark had brought his axe down on the dragon's head, and called out to Fryren and Fern to fire at it. However, they did not move. He was confused, and started to yell and insult Fryren until the elf girl explained that the dragon was already dead. Stark was shocked that he had killed the dragon on his own, and Fryren went over to get the treasure from its nest. He told Fryren that Aisen once told him that the hero party's adventure became deplorable. A deplorable yet incredibly fun journey. Fryren remembered these words being said by the dwarf, and how Aisen felt hesitant about their actions, since they were only doing little tasks during their journey that seemed to have no meaning, since they were supposed to defeat the Demon King himself. But Himmel asked if Aisen wanted a painful journey, causing the dwarf to become silent. Himmel said that he wanted a fun journey, even if it turned out to be deplorable. The three of them got back to the village and were met with celebration as Fern was testing out the magic. She looked over to Stark and casually said that something was small, quickly offending the red-haired boy. Fryren asked what Stark would do from now on, but he knew that his master had told them to take him with them, so he was going to journey with them since he wanted to experience a deplorable journey as well. They arrived at another city, specifically the fortified city of Qual near the Bakker Canyons. They were trying to pass through the barrier, but the guards would not let them through, as they believed the three of them were regular adventurers. Fryren decided to give up for now and rest for the time being, while she would try to find time to research some more magic. She left Stark alone with Fern, but Fern gave a glare toward the red-haired boy which made him go his own way. He found himself at a shop that sold something he ate as a child, but had to share it with Aisen since it was too big. But he was disappointed by the fact that it was smaller than he remembered. Fern seemed to have followed him there, and wanted to ask him what he would think if he were told that they would have to stay in town for at least 2 years. To which he responded that he wouldn't want to. He was confused as to why Fern was asking him that, but Fern only said that she was relieved that he was a normal person. They left the shop and looked at the gate, wondering how they would get past the barrier. They couldn't fly over it as there was a powerful magical barrier there as well, causing the two of them to try and ask around the city, such as the Merchants Guild or places like the Black Market and Thieves Guild, using Stark's supposedly great bluffing skills. They did not find much success, but Fern was impressed that Stark was being incredibly cooperative. He started to tell the story about how Aisen had brought him to the very spot where they stood now, to see the north clearly, and how the dwarf would happily tell many stories of the hero party's adventure, and how he treasured such an adventure above anything else. Stark wanted to indulge on this journey, and bring back plenty of tales to share as repayment to Aisen, since Stark didn't want to rest easy for too long, or else Aisen would die soon. The two headed back and saw Fryren seemingly hiding from the guards and soldiers, but they found the three of them in a fast manner. They were startled until it was known that they were following the elf girl, as they were trying to apologize to her since they had finally figured out her identity. Fryren was confused until the Chamberlain of the city said that he knew that the three must be trying to embark towards the north again, and told them that they would have permission to pass through the barrier freely, surprising Fern and Stark at how easy it was in the end. Fern wondered if they could have just declared Fryren's name to begin with, but Fryren herself did not think it would work. Fryren would also admit that she didn't like the fact that she would have to be seen off in such a grandiose manner. But Stark was glad to have witnessed it, since Isen went through the same thing. After hearing this, Fryren remembered that moment and believed that Stark was right. However, she still felt disappointed that she couldn't have time to research magic like she was planning to. Fryren had a memory of her time with the hero party and how they had received a book from their last mission. It was supposedly a grimoire of the great mage Flamme, but the elf girl knew that there were no real books written by Flamme, and all that she ever found were fake grimoires. However, despite that, she was still impressed by how the fake she received that day was extremely well made. But Himmel couldn't see what made it so special. Hyder jumped in and said that there was no way for them to know whether the real book existed, and it was as if Flamme herself came out of a fairy tale, for being the supposed creator of mankind's magic. Fryren hummed and thought from the priest's words, and knew it was seemingly a fairy tale, since she was probably the only one who remembered that person's face anymore. She finally woke up and realized that it was morning, but Fern could only focus on the fact that the elf girl was awake so early, even when Stark couldn't understand the value of that moment. The morning was spent with the red-haired boy giving Fryren a message, while Fern would feed her, making Stark wonder if he truly should have went on a journey with the two girls as a vanguard for them. They had finally all arrived at their next destination, the Great Aang Road, where they had to help out a man with a wagon to pass by a road that was blocked off by debris. Stark wondered if they needed to do a task such as that when they could just use magic in order to lift the wagon to the other side. But Fryren explained that it would mean the next person who came along would have trouble, and she called the boy selfish. After Stark had done more shoveling on his side of the cliff, Fern had called for his attention, and asked if he could help her on her side, but the boy stayed silent for a moment. Fern was confused and called out his name again, until he told her to stop it with the pleasantries, since he was not much older than her. With this notion, she decided to just use his name only, which seemed way too casual all of a sudden, and was not what Stark was intending. He corrected himself and said that he meant alternative honorifics such as San or Kun, and for her to treat him more cordially. But Fern just called Stark a loser, and continued calling him the way she already was, while he went to begrudgingly help her. It was finally done after a while, and the man thanked them, before starting to guide the three of them to town as a thanks. They made conversation, and the old man asked for confirmation of Fryren being an elf, to which she confirmed, before explaining that elves were a rarity, and the days of these species of elves were likely numbered. The town was in sight, and there were many merchants lining up to get into the area, since there was seemingly a liberation festival that night, since it was a commemoration of the day that Hero Himmel's party subjugated the demon that oppressed that region. Fryren could not see the reason why people should celebrate such a feat often, but she had suddenly remembered a time when Himmel had another statue made of him. The elf girl would wonder why Himmel would get a lot of statues made after him, and while he was a little self-centered, he wanted everyone to remember them, since humans lived transient lives. Fryren decided that it was time to turn into the inn. However, Himmel gave one last reason why he wanted statues to be made, and that was so Fryren wouldn't be alone in the future, and that the party wouldn't be part of some fairy tale like Flamme seemed to be. Back in reality, the elf girl would stare at the statues of her and her past comrades with a blank expression, while citizens would celebrate around it. The old man was bewildered by how Fryren bore an uncanny resemblance to her own statue, but the man did not know that she was Fryren herself. She asked if this would continue on to the next century, to which the old man said that it would last for as long as the town stood. The next day, the three of them headed off once more to the ends of the north. Stark realized that he hadn't been told the destination of the journey, and asked where they were going, but all Fryren said was heaven. The three of them had ended up in the Graf Granite's domain, but it was quite suspicious as to why there were so many sentinels running around the area. Fern wondered if something had happened there because of these people in armor, but Stark decided that they should focus on who would be on shopping duty. Suddenly, Fryren noticed something and brought up her staff as if she were ready for battle, but Fern stopped her since they were in town. However, the elf girl mentioned that there were demons walking in town. 3 demons had walked into town and one of them had glanced over at Fryren, who was already preparing a magical attack. But the sentinels grabbed her and slammed her to the ground while restraining her arms, asking what she was doing. The long-haired demon, who was known as Lord Lunger, had looked toward Graf Granite, and asked if he was trying to instigate something. But Graf Granite said that while he despised demons to the point that they wanted to eradicate them, he was not foolish enough to openly harm the supposed messengers of peace. He tried to give the reason that the three of them were uninformed adventurers, and Lugner kneeled down before Fryren and saw the unfriendly eyes of the elf girl. She continued glaring at him while he would claim that Fryren had the eyes of someone looking at a wild beast. But Fryren would say that isn't an incorrect perception, and insisted that demons were incomprehensible wild beasts that mimicked human voices. With this interaction, Lugner would order the sentinels to throw Fryren into the mansion dungeon. Fern and Stark went to go visit Fryren in her jail cell at the mansion. But Fryren did not seem too alarmed by the situation, since the sentinels only told her to reflect on herself for the next 2 to 3 years. The purple-haired girl was disappointed in this answer, but the two of them had also come to tell Fryren that they had been doing some investigating while they were shopping. There was a demon she once knew as Aura the Guillotine, a great demon directly serving the Demon King, who was also one of the 7 Sages of Destruction. Fryren swore that all of the Demon King's subordinates had been dealt with, but it seemed as though Aura had been regaining power since over 28 years ago. However, despite that and the war she had with the town, Aura had supposedly requested peace, but the elf girl knew that this was going to be futile. Stark thought that it could have a good chance of succeeding, since the demon seemed eloquent, but Fryren insisted that demons are not to be trusted. She remembered a time when the hero party had met a small demon child who seemed so helpless, but the villagers begged them to kill the girl due to the actions she had caused on the villagers. This girl had held her bleeding shoulder and called out for her mother and how she was in pain, making Himmel hesitate, ending the situation. Fryren saw the hesitance and was about to finish off the job herself, when an old man walked up and said that they should give the demon girl a chance, even if she had eaten someone's child. This man was the village chief, and the people decided to listen along. But the parents of the child who died were extremely reluctant to the idea, including Fryren. The elf girl tried to convince Himmel that they should kill the demon girl, but Himmel said that she could seemingly communicate to them, and if something bad happened, they could do something about it since they were going to stay in the village for a while anyway. Everything seemed to be going fine, at least for some time. But all good things had to come to an end, one filled with flame and a dead village chief. The demon girl tried to explain that she had killed the village chief to provide his daughter as a replacement for the one that she'd eaten of that one couple, but no one seemed to be happy with the action. Before the demon girl could speak, Himmel had already cut off the demon girl's hands and saved the daughter, while Fryren was getting ready to attack. Fryren shot at the demon child as the demon girl cried out for her mother again, causing the elf girl to ask why it was using such a word when demons had no concept of family. It finally admitted that she was only using it in order to cause empathy, and make others less likely to kill her. Fryren tried to ensure that Stark and Fern would remember that demons only deceived, and the two went off in order to do some more investigating. Meanwhile, Lugner was sitting in the other part of the mansion while waiting for Graf Granite. He was not too upset with that fact, as he was more focused on thinking about the face of the elf girl in his mind, wondering where he had seen her before. Lugner thought back on the words that Fryren had said, and knew that she was correct in her expression and perception of them, as there was truly only one reason why man-eating predators would speak the human language. It was not to communicate, it was to deceive. Fryren knew that she should break out of the dungeon as soon as possible in order to try and protect the town. Graf Granite finally arrived and started to show the demons around the mansion, but Lugner was not interested in the stories to be told and kept up a mask. This room was Graf Granite's son's room, with a sword sitting on the wall, and Lugner asked where his son was now. But Graf Granite was not too happy with this question, as he responded that his son had died in a war with Aura 10 years ago. The sword was brought in front of Lugner's face, along with the other sentinels surrounding the demons, while the demon girl next to him tried to summon an attack, but Lugner told the demon girl to hold back. Graf Granite was not over what had happened all those years ago, and said that Aura's peace was not possible. The long-haired demon hummed in thought, before noticing that the room was extremely clean, before saying that he had kept his own father's room perfectly intact, the man that the hero party had killed. Lugner still insisted for peace rather than bloodshed, and Graf Granite fell for the lie and put the sword away, while the demons would be led to the drawing room as Graf Granite would give the negotiations some more thought. The demon girl asked Lugner what a father was, but even Lugner did not know, as he was only using it to appease the man and bring empathy within him. They noticed that Draught, the third one of them, had gone missing, and assumed that he had gone to eliminate a nuisance. That nuisance was Fryren, as the young demon boy was seen going to the cell and immediately killing the sentinel in front of the door without hesitation, before walking into the cell. Fryren was confused, until he introduced himself as one of Aura's executioners and how he was there to kill her. Draught felt as though the elf girl was an obstacle in their plan, However, Fryren was confident in her power and tried to warn Drott that she was more powerful than even Aura. But the demon boy continued to underestimate her. He smiled and brought a finger up, which summoned a wire that wrapped around Fryren's neck. But she was already a few steps ahead of him. He tried to say that mankind's magic was helpless against the wire, and Fryren agreed that it did and that it would be impossible to deal with the wire until she asked if all demons fought like infants, suddenly sending a magical attack that cut off Drott's hands and brought her back to the ground. Drott was completely shocked by this action and turned around with 2 wide eyes, not being able to process everything fast enough. He immediately regenerated his hands and tried to summon more wires until Fryren cut those hands off once again and tackled him to the ground, holding her hands over his neck. The demon boy tried to beg that he had something to say, but Fryren knew that this was another lie, and used her magic to decapitate Drott and finally kill him. Fryren was almost impressed that a creature such as a demon could try to claim that it would have something to say, but it was already too late as Drott was now already dead. His body slowly started to dissipate into dust, not even leaving blood behind. And Fryren walked out of the cell, since she knew that she had to report this attack to the Graph and finish off the other 2 demons. It would still look bad on her part, but she was banking on the hope that Granite would at least give her a pardon. When the elf girl walked out the door, she casually looked down and did not bat an eye when she realized the sentinel was dead, knowing exactly that that very scene would definitely look bad on her part while she tried to go along with her plan. Meanwhile, Stark and Fern were having some food for the day, and the red-haired boy said that the town was likely a peaceful one, since Isen had told him that a town with good food was a nice and peaceful town. Fern told him that it was time to go, as she decided that they would try to personally appeal to Granite for the release of Fryren, since it was only a matter of time before harm would befall the town. But Stark was a little hesitant, since Lugner among the 3 demons was incredibly powerful and had eyes set only on Fryren. That was likely because Lugner believed that he could eliminate people like them at any time, and Stark could be seen shaking in place due to his own fear of the power of that man. He spilled some of his drink on himself, which made Fern give him a handkerchief to wipe it off. The 2 of them knew that Lugner and the others were with Granite at the moment, but Fern said that if it were the hero party, they would still go regardless of how it would turn out. Stark agreed and said that it was time to go, and Fern started to walk off. But Stark still seemed to have some hesitance and claimed to not be able to get up. Back at the mansion, the demon girl told Lugner that she couldn't detect Drott's mana, which meant that he was likely dead. She claimed that Drott was being careless, but Lugner disagreed and asked if they, as Aura's confidants and executioners, would really die from simply being careless, meaning that Fryren was more powerful than originally thought. Granite had finally arrived and apologized, explaining that the mage they apprehended had escaped from the prison, and had supposedly beheaded a sentinel. The demon girl, who was known as Linny, was told by Lugner that she would assist the search as she could detect magical power, but Granite said that it was fine and asked where the 3rd demon was. Lugner tried to lie that Drott was in the restroom, but Granite saw through the lie, as none of the demons should have even known where the restroom was. Granite knew that Fryren should have known how severe a crime of slaughtering a sentinel was, and asked once again where the 3rd demon was, while all the rest of the sentinels held up their swords in anticipation of an attack. And oh, did an attack happen! Lugner bit his hand and brought out blood, which seemed to be his magic, as it swiftly killed all the sentinels in the room and even harmed Granite himself, as the long-haired demon seemed excited to know that the situation could only be settled through violence. He knew that Fryren's perception was true and that demons were truly wild beasts. But Lugner was going to keep Granite alive since he was needed to lift the protective barrier on the town. Stark and Fern were about to arrive at the Graf's estate, until suddenly they passed by Fryren under a hood, who seemed to be hiding. She explained that she had no choice but to break out, as one of the demons had come in and tried to attack her, but she had easily killed him. However, a guard there had been killed, and it would definitely look bad on her part, since he was beheaded with magic. The elf girl knew the severity of such a crime and planned to leave town, but Stark tried to beg for Fryren to come and help them against the demons. Fryren knew that the 2 were not weaker than the demons, and even though Stark continued to cry cowardly, Fern pulled him away, as Fryren continued making her way out of town. She knew she had to leave town, but she was also leaving as she knew that Aura was already waiting outside the town with her army. When night came, Stark and Fern jumped to the gate and tried to sneak into the mansion, but the red-haired boy wondered if it was okay. However, Fern was quick to sarcastically ask if Stark wanted to inform the gatekeeper that they came to kill the messengers of peace. They climbed through the window and noticed how strange and eerily quiet it was in the mansion, which could only mean something bad. In another part of the mansion, Lugner was seen looking out a window over at the city, while talking to Granite about how he had a penchant for magic. It was similar to how Qual, the Elder Sage of Corruption, spent the majority of his life developing his killing magic. The long-haired demon explained that demons devoted their lives to researching one particular magic throughout their lives, and after 10 years, their magic would become far superior and further solidify their strength. He was disappointed to know that such a simple barrier made by the Great Mage Flamme from a millennia ago could still surpass the magic of that day, frustrating Lugner as he asked Granite how the magic of the barrier worked. Graf Granite kept his mouth shut, which caused Lugner to sigh and walk over with Linny, telling him that they would let him think it over, as all that was left after that was torture for refusing to tell them more. As the two walked down the hall, Lugner believed that there must be a grimoire relating to barriers somewhere, and told Linny to check the bedrooms while he checked the library. Granite sat there tied to the chair, as Stark casually walked in and started to try and cut the man out of his restraints. The red-haired boy was shaking out of fear, and Granite could feel it, saying that it was brave of Stark to do such a thing like this, since his own deceased son had trembled as well before being sent to the front lines of battle. After a while of attempting, Stark realized that he couldn't cut the rope, and wondered if there was some magic on it. Granite decided that Stark should forget about him, as it was already the end of the road for him anyway, as the townspeople were more important. Stark didn't believe that anyone would listen to a word he would say, but Graf Granite said that the boy could just take the family crest and show it to the Sentinels. He called Stark stupid for speaking to him so casually, and said he would overlook it as the priority was to run. But Stark insisted that Granite should be saved, and pulled out an axe to break the chair, until it was too late, since Lugner and Linny had already walked into the room. Granite tried to make an excuse that Stark had only tried to come and negotiate for Fryren to get out, without realizing she had already escaped, and Lugner bought the lie and told Stark that he was free to go. However, Stark stood his ground and attempted to attack the long-haired demon. He was quick and took a swing at Lugner, impressing him at the speed that grazed his shoulder, if it weren't for the fact that he was faster, and pinned the boy to the ground using his blood magic. Fortunately, Stark was not alone in this fight, and gave an opening for Fern to send an attack through the window, before Linny could even process her senses. The attack sent Lugner flying to the wall as he asked what magic Fern was using, to which she only responded that it was simple offensive magic. The two soon ran off with the Graf as Lugner's arm regenerated, and the long-haired demon told Linny to chase them and kill Stark only, as Fern was way stronger than they thought. Lugner knew that that magic was the same that he had once been inflicted with before, remembering his past and how he could finally put a name to that face from earlier, Fryren. She was known as the mage who sent the most demons to the grave in all of history. Fryren the Slayer. Stark and Fern decided to take shelter and hide the Graf at the town's church, quickly getting him patched up and out of his restraints as he thanked them for their help. He wanted to forgive them for the incident with Fryren since her judgment of the demons was obviously correct. And he felt even worse about his behavior, since he had not previously known that the elf girl truly was the elven mage who was part of the hero's party. The Granite family owed a great debt to the hero party, since it was back in his grandfather's time when the town was attacked by a demon army and was repelled by the hero party. Their enemy at the time was also Aura the Guillotine, and that was where Fryren was, floating in the sky while staring at the familiar face. It had been 80 years since they last fought, and Fryren said that it would be nice if the army could go back. But Aura simply said that she would rather not explaining any further as she sent the headless sentinels towards Fryren, before saying that it was due to her superiority in power. The elf girl was not amused or scared of the situation, rather focusing on how Aura seemed to have gotten strong enough to control many more undead than she did all those years ago. Fryren was sickened by the use of such magic, and recognized some of these suits of armor, further motivating the elf girl in her desire to kill Aura as soon as possible. Granite was explaining the demon magic that Aura used to Stark and Fern, the Scales of Obedience, and said the item she had was the primary reason the town hadn't been able to defeat her all those years ago. It was a magic that subordinated enemies to her will, as long as they had lesser mana than her, giving her the ability to use that person's body as a puppet for eternity until it turned to dust. Since Aura possessed tremendous amounts of mana, it was a magic that almost never failed. Fern wondered if it was possible to resist the magic, to which Granite said that if there were a soul that exceeded Aura's mana to be placed on the scales, it would be possible to defeat her. However, in the 500 years that Aura began her reign, such a situation had not occurred before. Fern asked once more, and Granite admitted that there truly was a way to resist, as there used to be a man with an iron will that somehow went against her magic. But Aura just found the will to be a hindrance, and it still didn't prove to beat her. Since then, Aura had enacted a rational measure on those she controlled. All of the sentinels and soldiers had swung at Fryren from all directions, but not one of them had ever grazed her skin or clothes. Aura asked what the elf girl thought of her powerful undead armor, but Fryren did not respond and held her staff, summoning a bright light around her body that made all nearby enemies collapse to the ground. The demon girl was disappointed at how Fren was able to dispel the magic that Aura cast on them, making Aura ask why Fren was not just blowing the enemies away like it was a show similar to back then. Fren chuckled at the memory and remembered how Himmel had gotten angry at her after the battle. But Aura reminded Fren that Himmel was not around anymore. With these words, Fren held up her staff once more, and said how she was glad to hear that, since it meant that she could slay all of them off without any mercy now.